Well, good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to get our next panel in place. My name's David Burrowes. I'm the chair. I'm not the chair, indeed, I'm the advisor to the, almost an upgrade, I'm the advisor to the chair of the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, known as the Article 18 Alliance. It's a great pleasure to be able to chair this next panel, invite the panelists to come up to take their seat. This panel will be wanting to explore, and it's going to be very much an engaging panel. I'll be welcoming your questions, which you can already start thinking about, looking very much at the heart of the question of how can freedom of religion or belief help overcome radical ideologies. We're going to be looking at that critical role of freedom of religion or belief. We're looking at how it can be used to foster that environment of tolerance and respect, to look at best practice examples, and you'll probably have those yourself from your fields of expertise, how we can prevent radicalisation and ensure freedom of expression for all religious affiliations. Our wonderful panel that we have here, we have firstly, on my right, we have Tomáš Halík, who's a professor of sociology at the Charles University in Prague. You'll see his full bio in the program before you. We also have Iman, Abou, Atta, who's the director of the TEL MAMA, which is the acronym for Measuring Anti-Muslim Attacks project in the UK, as well as leading interfaith, intercultural conflict resolution and anti-extremism and discrimination programs in the Middle East and the UK. And we also have Tasnim, who's the director of the Institut de Promotion de Formation sur l'Islam, excuse my French, in Belgium, and that institute finances training courses on Islam in universities. And last but very much not least, we have Mohamed Elsanousi, who's the executive director of that global network, which is well known to many, of the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers, and also USERF Commissioner in the United States, as well as much, much more, which you'll see in the bio. So the first question for my panelists to answer is, and I'll come to Tasnim first actually, is to, obviously let's get to some definitions. What is it that we need to overcome in relation to radical ideologies, and can we really define radicalisation? Over to you, Tasnim.
Yes, can you hear me? Fine. It's difficult to define radicalization. In fact, there's as many definitions as state institutions, and each scientific discipline has its own definition, and within each discipline we will have many definitions of radicalization. So there's no consensus on definition itself, but instead of giving a list of definitions, I will just give you a few remarks about the term radicalization. First, its etymology. The word radicalization comes from radical, which is, it first appeared in the 15th century and comes from classical Latin or medieval Latin, radix or radicalis, meaning roots or foundation. The idea is that it has been, the word radical has been used in different disciplines, from medicines to hard science, but in human science it means taking things from roots, foundation, which could be either peaceful or through violence. The term come back in the 19th century in politics, in France especially, when some political party used the word radical to define themselves, like the Party of Radicals. And as a hero of French Revolution or Enlightenment period, they present themselves, they wanted to change the French society radically, so that's why they come up with this name. The French Academy would define it as, would use it in the sense of stiffen, harden, and pushing to the extreme. That's for the etymology. The term itself, as we understand it today, that is the process through which group or individual resort to violence. It has been used since the September 11 attack on the US. Prior to that, the term was used rather as for individual designated people or groups parting away from a mainstream position in the pursuit of their goal. And it was not even used for those who would qualify today as radical groups, such as, for example, independentist movements such as IRA or ETA, or some left far-left movements such as Direct Action in France or Red Brigades in Italy. So the term in the EU, the very first time radicalization has been used in an official documents in the EU that backs to 2004, and it appears after the train bombing of Madrid in 2004 and London in 2005. Since the term has been used exponentially everywhere. Radicalization, those who get interested in and those who conducted the first research on radicalization with state agencies because of the circumstances, they work on radicalization, and at the beginning they put the entire blame and the cause of radicalization to religion, and specifically to Islam. But they quickly realized after a few years that actually the phenomenon was much more complicated than that. And they call upon the scientific community from 2006, and from that date, the scientific community joined in and tried to help define what radicalization was. So they come up with the fact that there was, again, no consensus on definition, and they come with 4 criticisms: the way state agencies or state institutions were dealing with radicalization. A group of scholars say first that radicalization, actually it was just a new term to define something that was already well known and documented, that is political violence. And political violence has been studied by social movements theory, for example, and it was very much well documented and well known, and so it was just nothing new. However, the situation is more complicated than that, and that was the answer of scholars. The second criticism is that they make a difference. They say to state institutions that radicalization, as the way it was used, I mean, they didn't make any difference between what they call a cognitive radicalization and a behavior radicalization. The difference is there is no direct link between someone who is radical and resorting to violence. In fact, statistics shows that less than 1% of people identified as radical ever get involved in violent action. That was a finding of this research. Also, they highlight the fact that radicalization was instrumentalized from the very start. That means that it has been used in non-free countries to disqualify enemies, to persecute, to harass, to eliminate sometimes enemies, political enemies. And in free countries, it also gave rise to abuses by putting the focus on religion, and it led to some abuses, legal and extra-legal, especially against the Muslim community. And finally, they also said that radicals have no identities, and it equally applies to other groups, such as, for example, far-right groups, which are posing a threat, and they are considered as a threat for the future, especially in a European country. And my last, to conclude my remark about radicalization, is the way radicalization is perceived and defined has a direct relevance for the elaboration of policies intended to counter it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we'll just get a follow-up from the rest of our panel. So, Mohamed, you've got a PhD, you've got a Master of Laws, you've got a bachelor's degree, you've well earned it. So can you define radicalization?
I mean, we can't. We cannot. Well, thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it. But before I begin, let me just express my appreciation and gratitude to our dynamic ambassador, Robert Rehak. Where are you, Robert? Wonderful job. I mean, I call it dynamic ambassador because he really taken this religious freedom or belief movement quite seriously, and we appreciate that. And of course, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs here at the Czech Republic for gathering us here today. But this particular topic and the definition of radicalization that's mentioned here, it cannot be complete, and it is natural that we cannot have agreed upon definition of radicalization. This is natural. Why I say this? Because when you look into radicalization, we have to look into the drivers of radicalizations. What are the drivers? If you mention the ideological drivers a little bit and the misinterpretation of religion and all of that, but there are other drivers as well. So they are socioeconomic drivers, which could include also widespread abuse of fundamental human rights. Can talk about poverty, lack of opportunities, and other abuse of human rights. So we have to look into the drivers, and I can go down the list about all of these drivers as well. They are psychological, spiritual drivers as well, which include also psychological and spiritual need to belong. So some people, they engage in the radicalizations because they don't have that sense of belonging. So we can go down the list about those kind of drivers. Then we can come back and define radicalization based on a specific driver. And why we are defining radicalizations, because we're defining, we need to have a clarity of the division, the definition, so that we can have an adequate response or solution to it. So that's why we need to categorize the definition based on the drivers. That's why we should not even attempt to have a specific definition.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to pick up on those very quickly. Iman, have you got anything to add to those comments, those opening comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to follow up from colleagues, I think radicalization is the process, actually, by which some people come to accept and believe in extreme and fringe views. And if we reflect on today's world, this is associated in many instances with religious extremism. I would therefore add that radicalization is the process by which some people come to accept and believe in extreme and fringe views, and which can cause social harm or damage to people, but not just to people, to the environment, to resources, to animals, etc. And the very basis of radicalization is based upon a premise that one individual believes has to be enforced or raised to a level where others have to accept it, either through pressure, threats, or other autocratic ways. And sadly, one way of enforcing their views is driven by religious extremism, and it's to propagandize that their way is the only way to divinity or the afterlife. That's one way. Whilst they seek to create and develop a rigid, inflexible, black and white and uniform social environment, supporting the freedom of religious beliefs places other ways of thinking into the public domain so that extremists can be challenged and their views potentially undermined. Now, the freedom of religion and belief therefore provides a platform for different ideas that can challenge the use of violence in religious texts, ensure that extremist rhetoric is undermined, and that more debate and discussion can take place, which in many ways marginalizes views that take away the choice and control from individuals. And we reflect on radicalization and extremism, it flourishes where there is little debate and discussion, and where there is little to rigid thinking. As I've suggested, extremists think of their religion and their way of thinking as being absolute. It's as though they alone have the answers, which means that the greater the number of faiths that are in the area, the greater the challenge to just one way of thinking and believing. And we have to emphasize the element of mental inflexibility. And I'll mention it a few times and keep mentioning it in the minds of those who are radicalized and who espouse extremist thinking. Choice is the best antidote to challenging mental inflexibility, giving people the right to choose what they practice, how they vote, where they worship, how they worship, and the ability to develop their own faith institution is a natural antidote to reducing extremism and radicalization in societies. So at a basic level, the sense of mental inflexibility is what develops in the process of radicalization.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And obviously, the panel, the question is how can freedom of religion and belief help overcome radical ideologies. But perhaps, Thomas, you could help us. What would you say is not in scope in terms of overcoming?
So I also agree that radicalization is a process of changing opinions and attitudes. From the linguistic point of view, radicalization can mean a return to the roots, radix, to the origins. Also, the term fundamentalism originally had a similar meaning, a return to foundations. Today, however, both terms, radicalization and fundamentalism, means something different, a dangerous turn from the moderate views and attitudes to those associated with intolerance, fanaticism, or even violence. The cause of such development may be internal psychological feelings of anxiety and disorientation in the society, in the world, which is increasingly complex and changing, and they may be also reaction to external economic, social, and cultural changes. The phenomenon of radicalization also occurs in the field of religion. The mission of religion, the culture, social role of religion, is to teach people how to overcome their selfishness, how to discipline their instincts, especially the instinct for aggression, how to live with others in peace and justice. Where the spiritual and ethical side of religion is forgotten or overshadowed, then religions are used primarily as an expression of group identity, ethnic identity. And it leads sometimes to the political abuse of religion, religious language, symbols, rituals, religious emotions. And in some cases, it is difficult to decide whether it is politicization of religion or sacralization of politics. We need the desacralization of politics. To desacralization, desacralization is the absolutization of relative values. The misuse of religious energy for non-religious, pure power-based purposes, but more about that later. So religions today are often used as a weapon in culture wars. The cause of the culture wars, which can lead to terrorism and wars, lie not in religion itself as such, but in its instrumentalization. When Richard Dawkins, a well-known promoter of atheism, wrote after September 11 that if there would not be a religious belief in the afterlife, the terrorist attacks in New York would never happen. And I asked if there wouldn't be no airplanes, there also wouldn't have been such an attack. It is necessary to distinguish between the causes and the instrument. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's now look, as Mohamed said, let's look into the drivers. Who or what is leading to this so-called radicalization or misuse of religion or beliefs? And let's come back to you, Tomáš, again. Your advice has been much sought after, not least by the founder of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel. So it would be excellent to hear from you, particularly in the world of politics. What are some of the drivers that you see?
I think it's important to reflect the role of the religious language and how the sacred texts are interpreted. So if we want to understand the social and political role of religion, we must look at the way sacred texts are interpreted. So the sacred texts, like the Bible and Quran, are the words very interestingly structured words, from which it's possible to bring medicine of wisdom or dangerous bombs of destruction. So religious authorities are teachers, and teachers have a tremendous responsibility to interpret the sacred text. And I think the serious relationship with tradition proposes a hermeneutical approach to read the text in the context, in the historical context. The hermeneutical principle in theology is an expression of respect to tradition. The sacred text can be taken either in the primitive way, literary, or seriously. Taking sacred text seriously means to understand the nature of religious language, distinguish between different literary styles, and the character of the particular messages. Fundamentalism does not understand the very nature of the religious language. The religious language is the language of powerful metaphors and beautiful images, symbols. They refer to deeper hidden meanings and therefore are treasure for meditation and always deeper interpretation. Neither the Bible nor the Quran are textbooks of history and science, but the important guides on the spiritual path. Sacred texts enable us to understand our world better, and the opposite, our experiences enables us to understand sacred text more deeply. I think the secular public has underestimated the power of religious language, religious symbols. These powers, with these suggestive images and concepts, can awaken the spiritual energy from the deep sources of the individual unconsciousness and the collective unconsciousness. Who knows something about that psychology knows what I'm speaking about, the role of symbols in our world and also in the politics and the religion. The symbols are full of energy, which is more powerful than the rational discourse, because it's connected with the deeper dimension of our psyche. So the religious language is not neutral and innocent, especially when people used to demonize their opponents and sacralize their own values and their leaders. When we call our political opponents the great Satan, for example, no rational agreement is possible, and the world becomes an apocalyptic scene of the final battle between good and evil, angels and demons. In this context, my friend, the philosopher Richard Kearney, quotes the advice of a psychotherapist to a client who was haunted by monsters in his dreams. He said, if you manage to look to the monster in the face while you are still dreaming, you will be surprised to find that the monster is very much like you. I think that this is one of the few good practical tips for healing our world, full of demons and monsters. We often project our shadows onto others, our dark sides that we are unable or unwilling to embrace. And I think this, it's important to take this projection of our own dark sides with humility into ourselves, and then to liberate our world.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So perhaps, Tasnim, do you want to follow up on your view?
So, what leads to radicalization? So, earlier I said there was no consensus on definition. However, there's a consensus of the scientific community on key variables when it comes to the concept. So, radicalization results from a complex interaction between personal characteristics, group dynamics, belief system, and contextual factors. So in other words, There's 4 pieces of factor actually which come together to produce radicalization, and that is personal and collective grievances, and by that I mean personal and cultural alienation, perceived injustice, humiliation reinforced by marginalization, xenophobia, discrimination, limited education, unemployment possibilities, criminal record, unstructured families, personal trauma, psychological issues. The second point is also networks and personal ties. Many researchers have demonstrated that sometimes family ties and play a more important role than ideology. Families do play an important role. Many times you see siblings and brothers involved in violence with extended families and stuff like that, and they are looking for a sense of belonging to a community, and all those things play a very important role, and much more than religion and ideology. And you have political and religious ideologies, and I'm going to develop that. And also, what is important is the enabling environment and support structures. When you have an environment which encourages sacrifices and violence or glorifies, obviously you are going to be attracted. And support structure, of course, if you have something to gain from that, it also helps radicalize. So it's at multiple levels what leads to radicalization. There's not only one factor, there's a set of factors, and researchers and academics talk more about they don't believe in profile, but rather than trajectories. So that's just the way to look at, and it had multiple causes.
Thank you. Iman, anything to add?
Yeah, maybe just to add and echo as well what colleagues have said. Yeah, just to add and to echo what colleagues have said, there are a number of routes to radicalization, and many of these overlap to support the process by which someone becomes radicalized. So you've got ideological beliefs, information, resource poverty, mental health, emotional difficulties, identities that feel attacked, and trauma are just some of the reasons. When some of these issues intersect and play a role in someone's life, they form the background into which a charismatic radicalizer can play into. Case after case of people who have been convicted of extremism and terrorism demonstrate multiple life factors that affect individuals, and where that charismatic radicalizer or radicalizers have manipulated them. Though, and we need to reinforce the fact that in the last decade, the online space has filled this space by bringing charismatic extremists digitally into the living rooms of people. And that's one thing that we need to look at and focus on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I basically referred the drivers, and Iman and Tasnim added to these drivers, but I want to add also to them what I call it the vicious cycle of increased social hostility. So what I mean by that, the vicious cycle of increased social hostility. Violent extremism causes fear, and that fear can be channeled into Islamophobia. In turn, expressions of Islamophobia can be seized upon by, communicated widely and further alienate youth and tempt even some into violent extremism. So thus the vicious cycle summons intolerance, and intolerance and violence also can summon violence as well. So that's why we look into this vicious cycle of increased social violence, make it clear that for us, the fundamental advantage of multi-religious cooperation in order for us to address that vicious cycle, to add it to the back factors as well. So it makes it also clear to others if, is not my enemy, but my ally in overcoming extremism. So these are all connected in order for us to come back and to address issues of radicalizations and address issues of drivers. We need to look into the cycle. It come back
Thank you, Rich. That leads very well into looking at how we can cooperate, religious cooperation and freedom of religion or belief, how that protection of that can help counter radicalisation. And perhaps you can help us in that regard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we need to start off with the basics in how protecting and promoting religious freedoms and beliefs counter hate and intolerance and foster a tolerant society. The fact is that creating an environment where people have the right to practice what they want as their faith ensures that this is core value, the freedom to believe and the freedom to choose what they believe, acts as a major countermeasure against autocracy and against a society based on conforming. Choice is key at the heart of such a policy. Religious freedoms support a very basic human right, the right to believe or not to. And this is even more essential in today's world where people are slowly falling into a more black and white way of thinking. Much of this is driven by mobile phones and the internet and the desire for quick and easy answers in an increasingly more complex world. We must also acknowledge that the black and white thinking is the very foundation of hate and extremism. In other words, you are either with us or against us. And the very statement demonstrates the polarized way of thinking that operates in a black and white style of thinking mindset. Protecting and promoting religious freedoms acts as a facilitator in developing mental flexibility and creating the gray middle space where people do not have to believe that one way of worshiping God is the only way in doing so, for example. It also provides a way that people can connect with each other. In other words, if you have the same rights as me to worship, then maybe, just maybe, in this equality of religious tolerance, I can see you as a possible equal in the journey of the worship of God. Another element that we have to consider on protecting religious freedoms and beliefs is that it levers in social capital into play in societies that can provide multiple services to communities and where maybe the state cannot offer. These services can help wider communities and support tolerance and social cohesion. Let me give you an example. In the UK, one of the things that many Sikh Gurdwaras have done is to provide basic subsistence such as food and disposable items of sanitation to poor people. Therefore, opening their doors to the sick, those with mental health difficulties, and those who have been homeless and neglected. In Sikhism, the concept of seva, or service to the poor, is a fundamental part of the belief system, since the gurus made clear that service to the poor was one of the ways that Sikhs could strengthen their spirit, faith, and devotion to God. By doing seva and giving to others, they have changed many minds who may have been resistant or even hostile to people of an Asian and Indian heritage. And we've seen how those that Sikh Gurdwaras have assisted have become ambassadors for respecting and honoring pluralism and diversity. This is just one example of how allowing the practice of faiths has benefited countries such as the UK in ensuring that social cohesion is maintained. Freedom of religion and belief also has an additional benefit in challenging radicalization and extremism. And in many contexts of different faiths, in the context of the UK, whether it's mosques, synagogues, churches, an element of opening days where people can come in and learn about other religions and beliefs, meeting the other, interacting in dialogue, a word that was highly mentioned in the first panel, is key to counter the radicalization and extremism, but also promote tolerance amongst different religions.
Thank you very much. Mohamed, you lead a global network of grassroots peacemakers and global players, and you really emphasize, I know I've heard you before, about the role of civil society in trying to counter extremism. Can you perhaps tell us more?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think it's really, it's a critical question, David, and the role of civil society, and particularly the role of religious actors, it's really is underutilized, let me put it this way, in terms of countering violent extremism and radicalization. Because we have seen practical examples where the securitization of addressing issues of violent extremism and lack of freedom is not working. So basically, the security of it is not working. That's why, and that realizations actually came late from a number of governments to address issues of radicalization, address issues of, basically violation of religious freedom through security means is not working. Civil society need to engage in this, and it needs to be some specific ways of collaboration between civil society and government, and we have seen that working. I can give you a lot of illustrations on this. From the United States, where I come from, for instance, if you remember in 11, 12 years ago, when Pastor Terry Jones, an evangelical pastor in Florida, decided to burn the Quran, right? He's claiming that it's a freedom of expression, right? But in that kind of situation, what role government could play? Basically, government cannot stop him from doing that because he has his freedom to do that, expression. But now the role and the moral voice of civil society will come in. So then the interreligious communities and the civil society and the religious communities, they frame the issue in a way that attack on one religion is attack on all of us. So let's frame it. Let's not look into this guy is enjoying a small church in Florida and burning the Quran. It's not only against Muslim, against everyone. That is, we need to frame the issue of addressing religious freedom. The way they framed the issue, they created an alliance. They created a group. And they had an emergency conference in Washington, brought all denominations, Protestants, Catholic, evangelicals, and all Jewish denominations and others, religious communities, to come together and to see, well, religious freedom against a Muslim is religious freedom against all of us. That's why let's address it this way. And that's where they created, with that very successful press conference. I remember at that time, that was during the President Obama's time, and the whole country was looking for a moral voice. I remember Secretary Gates at that time, Secretary of Defense, called Pastor Jones and told him, don't burn the Quran because our troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, they're in danger, right? Because of that burning the Quran demonstration in Afghanistan, 16 people were killed. But they cannot do much to stop him. But the moral voice of civil society was critical to this. So sent a strong message to the nation. We as a Christian community, as the Jewish community, as an evangelical, we say no to this. This is not a message of Jesus Christ. That was their message. Because the message of Jesus Christ is a message of love, not a message of hate. By them speaking on behalf of the American Muslim communities, the message is resonating and resonated to the entire nation. That momentum created an organization called Shoulder to Shoulder, standing with American Muslims, upholding American ideals, right? With all the Protestants and Catholic and all Christian groups and Jews actually looking into responding to Islamophobia through this alliance. So that's why, the importance of having to address these issues through civil society and to invest more in equipping civil society to do this work to advance religious freedom is so critical. And we have seen this working through the dialogue. My friends here, Nadine and Chris Seipel and Wade, we were in Uzbekistan in January. And we visited communities as a civil society, not government, to look into the state of religious freedom in the country, freely, to point out what's going on, right? And we did point out some stuff. We told them that the Baptist church in Bukhara, they are not enjoying their religious freedom. There is some issues. We brought it up to the authority. We brought it to the highest level, the advisor to the president, telling them, you need to fix this. This is our recommendations to you if you want a country that could be prosperous country. As Mariah was telling us earlier, studies have shown that if countries upholding religious freedom, they are prosperous. There is a reduction of violence, right? Nadine told us also in Erbil, right? In Kurdistan al-Iraq, region that upholds religious freedom is prosperous more. So when we brought this issue to the Uzbek government, we need to address this. They took it seriously. They took it seriously. And they did address the issue. 3 weeks ago, they came to Washington with their file, right? Showing us the church when we were there in January and the action they took in order to actually build a brand new church for them, right? So we pointed out collaboration between civil society and government. We need government to understand that the civil society, they have a critical, we have our own ways in discussion and discussing issues, right? We're more relevant as a civil society or religious actor when we talk to communities and addressing their issue. Then we need the government to trust us. We can fix it. We cannot fix it through, hard power. We need a soft power, the power and the soft language of religion, which is language of love and reconciliation.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the floor for questions, just finally, just looking at good practice examples, Tasnim, from Belgium perhaps, could you give us briefly some examples?
Just very quickly, I joined Mohamed when he said that civil society, and my colleagues Iman also talk about that. Of course, the civil society has a role to play, but it lacks means. So they need to be sustained and encouraged by the government, but it's not always the case. In the Belgian example is that the state response, it's always about legal and sometimes extra-legal measures they have taken. For example, in 2017, the Belgian government passed a law allowing legal residents to be deported if they were on suspicions of participating in violent activities, suspicion and not facts. So the response is always that kind at the first level, and it's counterproductive. And of course, we need to, since the government has realized that it also needs to prevent, and that's maybe the next question we're going to discuss, but prevention, it's important. Getting the civil society involved, of course, helps, but there's just lack of means. I'm seeing the religious actors doing what they can, the best they can to counter all those repression and kind of repression and the response the government is giving. And of course, we need a collaboration between state and civil society, but it's not always the case.
And Iman, could you perhaps give some examples also from the UK, maybe, and Europe, that can help us as good examples?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, some of the best examples of work around de-radicalization have involved identifying those espousing these views that seek to harm others or society, ensuring that they get access to a range of services, such as mentor and counseling support, advice and information on access to diversionary activities, such as sports, and in access to emotional support and emotional regulation. That's one element. Other techniques have used online advertising, so that when someone, for example, Googled the Islamic State or Daesh, they were automatically diverted to videos and to video adverts that demonstrated the extremely toxic nature of the group. And there's one specific example that I remember around when someone looked for two words, Jew hate and Muslim hate. They were diverted to a site that demonstrated how Jewish communities and Muslim communities had helped other people in their local areas of the person that was searching those two words online. So the promotional advert link was therefore targeted at a specific geographical level, and where the terms both Jew hate and Muslim hate were assessed as being negative in nature, and these were two key terms when they were entered into Google, automatically promoted a URL link to the diversionary positive site, showing how much local Jewish and Muslim communities were helping others. In the context of Europe, we were part of a project called Supporting and Strengthening communities across 15 European countries called SASCE, supporting and strengthening communities in Europe. It was a consortium of organizations from a Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, and Christian backgrounds, where best practices were shared, an understanding and dialogue across different faiths were around how do we protect each other, how do we protect our places of worship, how do we protect our communities, but also other communities, and work in partnership to do so by understanding the threats, the extremist threats, the religious hatred that is directed at these institutions, but also at the communities, and by bridging the gaps as well between communities. In certain instances across these different 15 European countries, a Buddhist person never sat with a Muslim person or a Jewish person, never understood what the threats that Muslim communities or Jewish communities were going through. And likewise, for the Christian communities, it was an eye-opener to understanding how they can safeguard their churches, understanding the threats that other communities are going under, but also standing in solidarity with them. I think when we look at extremism and the different examples that I shared, it cannot thrive when we shine a light on it or when we expose people to a variety of ideas. The more we introduce greater choice, ideas, and thought, it's the safer we make our futures.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And finally, Tomáš, there's a role for religious leadership as well in terms of prevention. Have you got some good examples in that regard?
Yes. I'm very much inspired by some ideas and actions of Pope Francis, especially his attempt, his process to renew the Catholic Church, the synodal renewal. Synodal, it means synod meets synodos, the common way to go together and to listen to each other, to try to understand each other, to try to respect each other, and to develop a unity as a unity in plurality. I think it's something what is important not only for the Catholic Church, but for the human family. And in this connection, the Pope has a very inspiring metaphor, church as a field hospital. And I think even the other religious communities should be field hospitals. It means not to stay in our own borders, mental borders, institutions. Go away, go to all the places where people are wounded, socially, economically, psychologically. And I think this field hospital, and the religious communities should be the field hospitals, needs also some background of the very solid hospital, which has several functions. One function is the diagnosis, the spiritual diagnosis of the world. We need this spiritual diagnosis. We have a lot of journalist explanations, sociologists, but we need also some spiritual diagnosis of our world. And then the other is to develop some immunity system against this global infections, this pandemic of populism. It is the very dangerous pandemic of our, and the churches should develop some immunity system against this very shortcoming reactions, and also the recovery, the reconciliation. And I think there will be a very important role of the churches and religions in the future, the reconciliation. I knew something about this role of the church after the fall of communism in South Africa after the fall of the apartheid regime. So after the dictatorship, after the wars, the societies are wounded. So in the future, people are now speaking about to create peace in Ukraine very quickly. It's not possible. We need not the peace of the court of the freedom, the courtyard. We need just peace, and it needs some time of reconciliation. You know, the Russians and Ukrainians have to live together after this war, and the reconciliation will be for generation, the Palestinians and the Israelis. It is a task for generations. The reconciliation is not just to stop the war and everything is done. No, there will be after wars, after dictatorships, the societies are wounded. There are people, they were guilty. There are people, they are victims. There are people, they have some hatred. They have some psychological wounds. It is a process of reconciliation, long and difficult process. And I think the religious communities have a very important role in this recovery process, and we must be prepared for this. Not just to say, yes, the world will very quickly stopped. It may be this hot wars, but reconciliation, it's a long time process, and the spiritual communities have a very important role there.
Thank you. Right, now it's over to you for just less than 10 minutes. Who's going to ask the first question to our panelists, or just to make a quick comment? That's also allowed. Who would like to start? Otherwise, we'll just keep on talking ourselves. Who'd like to start? There's many eminent experts there. You can disagree as well. You can have another view, things that haven't been said. Who'd like to start? All you need to do is press the button here. You don't need to come up to the podium. You can just press the button and say something. Anyone like to ask a question or make a comment?
So it seemed that
no.
we said everything we said.
That's encouraging. I'll go back to Tasnim. Do you want to just add anything?
I'm just going to maybe just add what can be. Okay, I was just say a few words about what should be done to prevent radicalization. So I think it's important to should be focused on countering terrorist propaganda and illegal hate speech online, especially. Also, we didn't talk about, but radicalization happens a lot in prisons. So it's a proper place where, I mean, people in prison get radicalized much easier than in civil society, but we don't know really how to tackle the issue. Promoting, of course, inclusive society, education and common value, and boosting research and building evidence and monitoring and networking on those issues. So that should be done to prevent radicalization. As far as the Belgian example is concerned, a part of the effort to I wouldn't say de-radicalization because we don't have any program of de-radicalization actually in Belgium, but they understand that, the government understands that to prevent that we need, I mean the mindset of our government is still focused on ideology and religion. And after the attacks in Brussels in 2015, I'm just going to give you an example of my institution I'm leading actually, IRFBA, which actually is part of the government policy to counter kind of radicalization in a way that they're trying to promote or to produce what they call a Belgian Islam. Don't ask me what does that mean because I have no idea, but it means just finding a way to remove conceptions. So the mission of my institution is to finance programs on Islam in different universities, French-speaking universities in Belgium, to remove misunderstandings between, what Islam and Islamism is, and not to give information about what Islam is, and it's not different from other religions, and that part, and also trying to give, we are trying to construct a curriculum on a bachelor degree and a master degree in Islamic science, so we can have a Muslim leadership grown at home, going through education, Belgian education, and to limit the effects of extremism, because at the moment the imams we have, for example, in Belgium come from abroad, and they have a different kind of education, and they're not homegrown. So the government wants our leadership, religious leadership, especially Muslim, to go through the educational system, Belgian education system, and get a religious education through our Belgian education system, so we can have a leadership, homegrown leadership, with a specific reading of Islam.
Please. That, which is very critical, to have homegrown imam, that they understand the context of the specific context, and that's what I call it, the contextual theology. So the theology that is based on the Belgium, for instance, culture and tradition. But we need to do more in integrating those communities.
Of course.
They're also facing so many problems, right? So we need to integrate them more. But let me maybe, Professor, I want to agree with you about the critical role of religion and religious actors, right? And I try to help religious actors to further engage. But we are yet to succeed in terms of convincing government that, religion and religious actors, they could be a solution to all of these problems. We're facing those problems. And we can, I don't know what we can, address that issue. But David, if you allow me, I want to share an experience to address radicalizations in the United States. In 2005, radicalization was all over the place, this notion of violent extremism. So as a community, as an American Muslim community, we came up with an initiative called Safe Space Initiative. Look it up, called Safe Space Initiative. Safe Space Initiative is campaign is the first major national grassroots efforts to equip American Muslim communities and campus leaders with practical tools for developing healthy communities, as well as intervention strategies for troubled individuals. The Safe Space Initiatives has 3 dimensions. Dimension number 1, prevention. How to prevent. That's in our Islamic Center on Mosque, to work on prevention. And there is a whole list of how to do that. Then the second element of it is intervention. When we see some elements of extremism or radicalizations, how we can intervene to address that. And then the hardest part is ejection. As a community, unable to prevent, unable to intervene to address the issue, then you should be ready to collaborate with law enforcement to eject that person from the community. And that will take a lot of courage and effort to build that trust. So the community trusts you when you call the authorities and then so-and-so in our community is presenting threat to the community and to the neighborhood and to the whole country. You need to have that courage. You need to build the trust within your own community to do that.
Well, in the last minute, so just a final word across the panel that you'd like to just leave everyone with. A final word from you, Tasnim.
Sorry, you said?
Just give a final word.
I don't know what to say and to conclude, just that, Yes, different thing has been said about the civil society, and I would say that my institution, actually, we are trying to work on to get the religious actors involved in our policies and try to work with them. For example, in 2 weeks, I'm gathering different imams because you have to keep in mind that Islam is plural. In Brussels, we have different, I mean, there's not just one Islam, there's many. You have Sunnis, you have Shias, you have different divide within the communities as well. And we're trying to put everyone together. And as a public institution, we are inviting imams from different belongings, different Islams, let's say that. And to engage into a dialogue with the religious leaders in Brussels.
Thank you very much. We've run out of time, but just a very quick word.
I think we live today in very difficult times globally. And I think in the room here, we all most probably agree on so many things, but there's so many that are outside this room that do not reflect on messages of unity, on solidarity, on what binds us, on our values, and on humanity, and on empathy. And I think these are things and messages that I think we can take away from today's event that we can most probably cascade down to communities worldwide.
Thank you very much. And finally, Tomáš.
I think religions have very important keys to very deep treasure of the spiritual and moral power, and we should to find also to develop some contemplative approach to the reality. There are so many very superficial approach to reality, and I think the religions should develop this deeper contemplative approach to reality, to understand the things that are also hidden, that are behind, and the spiritual and moral role of religion is very important.
Thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the end of our panel. Can you join me in a round of applause for our panel? And now it's time for coffee. Coffee will take place out there.